All right. So it is so lovely to be here today. I'm very fortunate to be able to present and grateful to be able to present to you today, and also to witness all the other fantastic mini talks that we've had. And Portland's such a lovely place to be. So really happy to be here with you all, and excited to meet some of you as well over the next few days. Okay, so my name is Rupa Reddy, and today my talk is entitled Around the World in 18 Schools, Lessons from Innovative Models Around the World. So 2 questions that guided me. The first one was, what can we learn from innovative, progressive alternatives around the world? That's something I've been thinking about for a long time. And the second one was, how can we move away from the critique of conventional so-called factory-style systems of education that we're all well aware of, moving away from that into a space of productive change, and even if those are small elements, regardless of the context we work within. And I say that because I was formally trained as a public school teacher and have worked in university classrooms for the past 5 years, university and college programs. And so I'm interested in both alternative spaces but also in public ones. All right, so the first thing I wanted to share before jumping into 3 kind of general lessons that I've learned over the past year was where this started for me, at least this journey. So as I just mentioned, I was teaching in an undergraduate business classroom for 4 years in a business school in Waterloo, Ontario. So I live in Toronto. And I really did love my time there. It is so much fun to be able to facilitate learning with young people who are super enthusiastic, maybe not about the subject, but about life, about their ideas. They are not yet jaded by, some of the harsh realities of the world. So I really did love the environment. Of course, there were things that frustrated me. Some of them have come up, and all of you know of them already, like the obsession with grades that many people on all sides of the equation seem to have. The limitations of lecture halls that look like a bigger version of this, right, where there's limited things that we can do to change things up. So there were frustrations. There was also a lot of hope, though, that I started to see with things like flipped classroom approaches, integrated project-based learning, student-guided kind of courses that are starting to pop up in little spurts. This is an example of one of those ideas. You can vaguely see Jerry there. He's in the blue striped shirt. That's Jerry Lewis, senior undergrad business student, and this is part of a service learning experience that I was able to help facilitate as faculty advisor for a social entrepreneurship club. And it was very interesting because these students, and Jerry was one of the leads, helped research elements of a microfinance model for women at a nutrition center in Haiti. And they did this for months, like leading up to our visit. Of course, we get to Haiti, and you can guess what happened. Nothing was as we thought it would be, and the realities on the ground were very different than the research they had done, right? And so we ended up putting aside our plans and our, research for a bit just to learn from the community we were in. And I just wanted to share one of Jerry's reflections. This is a direct quote from a reflection that he wrote thereafter. And he said, "Instead of lecturing about the Haitian economy, we physically walked around the market. Instead of reading about the managers of the NGO, we interviewed them. The entire city became our classroom, welcoming us to a learning experience like no other." And that's from Jerry. And Jerry was a senior. He was in his final year of a double degree program in math and business, actually. So it was really interesting for me to see the whole process for a student like Jerry, who had done some solid research, like analytically, but who also went through the frustrations of what reality is like when you're trying to do something and having to unlearn and relearn and do that whole thing. And seeing that live just showed me how meaningful these experiences can be, even when they're framed by short time frames, a certain course, etc. So this started to give me hope for what is already happening, even in conventional models, so-called conventional models. Now, almost exactly a year ago, I found out my contract was coming to an end at the university, and I realize now and then too that this was a bit of a blessing in disguise, because I'd always wanted to explore more actively and more physically different models of successful schooling approaches and even elements. And so that is what I set out to do a year ago. And so this map, which some of you can see, if you can't, that's fine, just shows the different places I was able to visit. So I visited over 18 models now, interviewed a dozen educators for a video series that I will make sure to plug later on, and also just checking out different models. So I've been able to visit 7 different countries across 4 continents so far. Those are the red pins. The orange pins are ones that I've spent time in but really want to explore more models there. So that's like London and California, you can see. And the yellow pins in Norway and South Africa are ones that I have my eyes set on, hopefully, that I can get to very soon. So I realize, I will fully acknowledge, I feel like I'm at the tip of an iceberg. There is so much to learn from the different approaches and different people that you meet around the world, but it has been a pretty full and fruitful year for me. So today I'd like to share with you just 3 overall lessons that I have picked up through sharing a few of the stories from some of the models that I've seen. So lesson number 1 is that context matters. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So this is an image of a little girl at Pono, which is a school in New York. And actually they're affiliated with Arrow, so some of you may be familiar. Started by Dr. Mesa Bosna, who couldn't be here this year. And Pono is a very special kind of learning community. It's a very small school. The day I spent with them, there were 9 or 10 children in attendance. They spend 2 days a week outdoors, like fully. So this morning we were in Central Park, and they had a naturalist, a visiting teacher, come in and explain, several things that I didn't know, to be honest. And the students loved it. And here this little girl's playing with these turtles. She was actually naming them, I think, at this point. But so that's one of the things they do, is 2 days a week of outdoor education. They have 2 days a week indoors, but it is a democratic school, so students have the choice of whether to attend their classes. And this starts, I think, after the age of 4 or 5, where that kicks in. And they also, and this was alluded to just previously, they start learning certain subjects when they're ready for it. So when a child says, how do I read this? Or what, that's when they start teaching them how to read. So that motivation is there before they start learning. And it was really interesting, like Mesa was explaining to me, that she didn't expect it to be the case, but their academics have been quite strong, I'm sure partly as a consequence of that. And so that was another interesting thing I wanted to share about that model. And then 1 day a week, they have a mentorship day where the students decide on what they want to work on for that term. So one example she gave me was a production. They were putting on like a play, and so the students took care of everything, like from the production to the costumes to the script, and the facilitators, which is what they call their facilitators, helped guide them through that process. So they did that 1 day a week as an example. So a very special school, I felt. But when I say context matters, in this case, the parents that send their kids there, and I interacted with one of the parents who was there that day, were actively looking for an alternative. They were considering homeschooling their kids. Otherwise, they may have already been in a homeschooling environment before. They wanted a shift away from the emphasis on grades. So generally, people were already aware of this space, is what I found. And also, it was hard for me not to notice that they also tended to be from a higher income bracket. Socioeconomics plays a part in alternatives as well, and this is one example where I saw that. That said, Pono in particular has a sliding scale for tuition, which I found interesting to try and help address some of that. Okay, I need to move a little bit. So in terms of context, this is another school in New York. This is TWILS, which is the Young Women's Leadership School. They're actually a network of schools, and this school in particular was at 106 and Park, so in East Harlem. And this was a very interesting visit as well, very different in terms of context from Pono. Many of the young girls, and it's a young women's leadership school, so all girls high school. And the day I was there, they had a STEM fair. So they were showing me, this is robotics that they were working on and programming those little robots. But you start to realize, like in this school, they're very clear that their goal is for every one of those girls to get into college. And they have a full-time college admissions officer, I think may have been her title. And her full-time job is to help navigate the systems and the processes to help get these girls not just into colleges, but to help them with the finances. So very interesting. And when I spent the day there, I realized like the confidence that these young girls have developed and the importance of getting into college. Many of them, the majority of them, I don't remember the percentage, but come from families where they will be the first to go to college. So I know that it's hard to compare models, but it does show you the importance of context. So as much as I always argue against the importance of grades and we need to move away from that, I still think we do, but you need to understand the context you're working in and the communities. I mean, there's so many other factors to play into that, but I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so that was my first lesson, context matters. The second one I've kept noticing, and this has come up today, which I think is reassuring, is that access is an issue. This is an image from Green School in Bali, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, if not seen the TED Talk by John Hardy. It is a beautiful school. Honestly, it feels like walking through somebody's dream. It's like 70 of these bamboo structures, no walls in their classrooms, so they're not really rooms. It is beautiful, and the students have acres and acres of land to explore. They have a school cow. Like it's pretty amazing to see. And their school day is also interesting. They split it up. The student who took us on a tour, he was a grade 12 student, and he mentioned they have 3 portions to their day. The first one is experiential, so he literally that morning had gone surfing, was part of his experiential learning. Yeah, which was very cool. And then they also have a thematic unit. So one that he explained to me had to do with raising a pig. So they were learning about livestock, and they raised the pig. They slaughtered the pig. I'm guessing these are older students. And then, they prepared it for a meal. So just to understand that whole cycle and process. And then the last element of their day with subjects like math and English, they still have pretty formal, structured lessons. So kind of an interesting breakdown of the day. The one thing that I got held up with at Green School was the access issue. So they set out to have 20% of local Indonesian students attending their schools. They have not attained that goal, nor have they managed to sustain whatever enrollment they have. And it was kind of obvious for me to see as I was walking around, but the student, because he was a 17-year-old or whatever, and as they say, they're all real talk. So he told me kind of straight up, he said, when there are Indonesian kids who are here, they just don't fit in. Like they don't feel like, they fit. They come from a completely different environment, culture, background, and although it appears like, there are some Indonesian principles here, the reality is the majority of students and teachers are expats from places like Canada, Australia, the US, and you feel that. It's quite obvious as you walk around. So access is an issue here, but it is a beautiful school. So I think there are things that we can still learn from every model, and in this one it was about the design of this school and also elements of the school day. All right. This is a program called Dharavi Art Room in Bombay, in India. And I was here actually just last month. So this is quite a contrast. This is in Dharavi community, which is one of the largest slums in the world, and the largest one in India. There's estimates of close to 1 million people potentially living in this community. It's very industrious. If you see like the little tiny houses, they have proper industries being like stimulated and running in there, which is kind of amazing. But at the same time, it's not the safest places you can imagine for kids. And two of the educators I met here, super inspiring. Their names are Aki and Himanshu, and they run an art program for kids who live in this slum. So it's not a full day program. It's like an extracurricular, but it's a safe space for these kids to now come. That narrow, tiny staircase leads up to a small one-room area. And Himanshu is a graduate of a fine arts program, and he was well sought after to work commercially, but he decided to dedicate, he's been doing this for over a decade, well over a decade, and just teaching these kids. And it's impressive to see how structured, like they have 4 stages, I think it is, of their art program. So it's flexible, but they definitely have, you know, fleshed out a program. They have a certificate and graduation program for the kids. It's really sweet, and the kids love them. And Aki, who is his partner, is working on her doctoral degree in social work. So very interesting to see that. One of their biggest challenges is funding, as you can imagine, and the lack of resources. So I know it's not that fair to compare these two. It might seem like they're completely different playing fields, but I can't help but see the stark contrast and the need for more resources in areas where it's needed for kids who come from backgrounds based on, you know, circumstances that are beyond their control. Okay, and my final lesson here is that each model is unique, like a snowflake. And so what I mean by that is that there are unique strengths and challenges. I did not find a single model, I haven't found, I don't think one exists, that does everything really well. I think it's impossible, right? And if they do try and do everything really well, you know, I feel nothing really is done well overall. So I think knowing what your strengths are and what your challenges are is really important. I'll come back to this in a second. I have a quick video that I wanted to play. How am I for time, Jerry? Okay, good. So I'm going to show you. This is just to give you a bit of insight into the little video series I mentioned. I just edited tiny bits so you can hear some of these educators yourself.
For me, 10 years, I would love to see economists being trained in a much different way. I would like to see economists trained in the field more, in their education, being more out in the streets and in the villages, understanding how people make decisions. I think with that, we are going to be able to train economists to be more conscious that we live in a social and natural ecosystem in which everybody is related to each other, and that what one piece of the system does affect the others.
The purpose of learning, the purpose of knowledge from those communities that I studied was basically to become a better person. It wasn't for certificates, it wasn't for degrees. I looked at different periods of history, different places around the world. There were 2 common themes that I found everywhere. The first was that education in those societies was not linked in any way to government. The learning centers, they were very independent of any outside forces. The other element in all of these societies was that the interests of the children were taken very seriously. It was not uncommon that a 10-year-old would be traveling to what we consider today another country to study with a scholar that he or she wanted to study with.
Art room is a safe space in Dharavi where kids come, and we use art as a medium of storytelling and empowerment for the kids. The major challenge that we face is financial, because it's like, it may look like a fun activity, but then it also requires a lot of money. Like, we have to pay the rents, we have to get the materials.
We want them to be lavish, like it should be like everything is available kind of, because a lot of times when we partner with other NGOs, there's always like, why do you have to use watercolors, or why do you have to use a better quality paper, maybe just like make do with something which is kind of, yeah, it could, but maybe for kids we should not have that. Like maybe elders can do the make do and like the whole jugaad thing and like kind of make something, but for kids it should be like, as kids of everybody's would have everything, maybe kids also should have everything like.
That was a very quick excerpt, but you can see the full videos later. So that just gives you a taste. Like, there's so many things happening in different parts of the world, and they are quite unique in their strengths and challenges. That said, I do see some light bulbs that I quickly wanted to share that I've observed are happening more commonly, regardless of context. So the first handful there is the strengths across contexts, rethinking grades and this concept of success. What is it that we are really working towards? Teachers as facilitators is another common one I've noticed, is changing the role of the teacher basically, and which then changes the role of the student. And that connects to self-directed learning, where kids are driving more of their learning, not just kids, but the learners. Outdoor education, we saw that at Pono, but in other schools as well. Integration of subject areas. So, looking at the example of studying oceans at Green School, they connect that to calculating something to do with the waves he was explaining, studying the life form. So using those themes to delve into different subject areas, experiential projects, and I mentioned self-directed learning. One thing I noticed people talking about, but I haven't seen done as well in practice, if I'm being honest, is the middle category, the potential for more. So mastery of learning is something people talk about, but it's really hard. I mean, we all agree that grades are not the most effective way to assess learning, but how do we really get to mastery of learning in alternatives or otherwise? That's one thing I'm still interested in. The use of technology. So one of the gentlemen I met in Colombia doing amazing work talked about technology versus tradition, and marrying the two together, so respecting cultures and traditions, but how do we facilitate learning and access to technology in those spaces as well? Systems and critical thinking, so Zoe Weil, who was here last year, speaks a lot about a solutionary approach, so really looking at systems as a whole when you're solving problems and not working in silos. Arts education seems to still not be a priority in many schools. And intercultural local programs. A colleague of mine at Wilfrid Laurier works on global and local, kind of bringing those two into the classroom and outside of it. And that's where the Haiti program began. And then key challenges that I've noticed people speaking about that I've interviewed. The first one is scaling and sustaining projects. So how do we sustain the projects that we have and then grow them, particularly when you're starting your own project? And I know some of you are doing that already, have done it, or looking to, and that's one big challenge. Changing mindsets, I've heard that already today, and particularly more for the adults, not so much for the learners or the children, because even if we feel we're ready for this change, it's really hard to take that plunge when you're designing things, when you're implementing it, when you're seeing kids have more freedom than you're used to. And that goes broader into society as well. And then relevant assessment strategies, which ties back to mastery of learning. How do we assess learning? That's just a huge question. I'm not saying I have the answer. I just still think it's a big open question we need to keep exploring. Okay, and the final thing I wanted to share with you, because those were implications I think that apply across contexts, is moving forward, where am I at? What do I think is next? I think it's important for us, and this is particularly for people designing models of schooling or helping to improve the ones that you're part of already, is looking at a framework for how do we do this in a more balanced way. And so those of you familiar with the startup space, there's a tool called the Business Model Canvas that just helps in terms of a strategy tool of looking at different elements to consider. And I think it's important in the education space to also have that bird's eye view. So at the core of this, what I feel is important, I've used that Taoist symbol, but that just represents, to me, your core philosophy. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is your mission statement? And we heard from Judy this morning about the contrasting mission statements, from the Department of Education in the US versus some of these alternative schools. So being clear on what it is you're trying to achieve. The second thing that links to this is who are the children that you're serving? So really understanding their context and their needs, their communities, that goes into, political, economic, all those areas, so that you can really understand the people you're trying to serve. The next one is the areas of learning. So I notice shifts away from formal subject areas, but is that more holistic? Is that more integrated? Does that involve outdoor education? So being clear on your key areas of learning is something I think is important. As well, key partners. So I found that, that saying, it takes a village. Nobody can do this on their own, and there are skills we have and skills we don't. So who are those key partners? Whether it's parents, whether it's visiting teachers, all of those resources you may need to ensure a bit more success, I suppose. And then your resources within the organization, like your human resources and the skill sets you do have, being clear on what those are and who is going to help deliver them. And the last few, that one up there with this the tablet and the mountains is your modes of delivery. So what are you going to use to actually implement all those areas of learning? Will you use a mix of technology and outdoors and in a classroom? Like, what does that look like? Those stars have to do with assessment. How will you assess learning? We already talked about how that's tricky. And then the last two, none of us want to talk about, but I think are really important, and that is the costs that are involved. What does your cost structure look like? See, that already sounds terrible, but it's really important, I think. And your your revenue model, how are you going to sustain and scale? And I think that when we look at all of these different elements, we can identify what we're stronger at, what we might need more work on, and it might help us to design successful models moving forward. So thank you so much for your time. This is just a note of thanks to all the people I've met over the past year and beyond. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about what I've been up to, I do have a website/blog, which you can find at edumodels.ca, or follow the Facebook page, facebook.com/edumodels, and the video series is on Vimeo, vimeo.com/Rupa. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Time for maybe one or two questions. Anybody?
There's one back there. You want a mic?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what was the criteria for you selecting the schools?
Yes, that's a good question. I meant to say it right at the front. Most of them I've found through my own network, so friends of mine who are working in the alternative ed space. Some of them I had researched on my own. For example, Green School is one that I've always wanted to visit. So I either found them through my own personal research or through my network. Yeah.
Okay, out here.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about the two that you noted you were interested in delving more deeply into, if you don't mind sharing a little bit.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's so many innovative models. Norway is one I came across a school that has done away with subjects and grades completely, so not too far off from some of the Finnish models that we see. So that's what I'm curious about seeing in Norway. To be fair, anywhere in the Nordic countries, I just want to see what that looks like. And South Africa, I find because of their historical context, would be really interesting to see some of the innovations happening there. And I know of a few schools that work with orphans in South Africa as an example, and that work on integration of people. So yeah, those are two areas I'm curious about.
Okay, Rupa Reddy.
Thank
you. Okay, so we're going